Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a cinematic, deeply psychological look at humanity's very first kingly archetype. We're talking about a figure who completely altered the trajectory of human history. And the wild part? He didn't do it through chaotic destruction. He did it through organization, architecture, and the sheer overwhelming force of collective human ambition.
So it begs the question, what actually drives the human need to build empires? To really get this, we've got to set the scene. Picture the world right after the flood. It's wide open, totally unstructured, and people are spread out. Humanity is basically hitting the reset button. You've got absolute simplicity, just one family, a washed clean earth, and this fragile new hope. Life is multiplying and scattering across the globe, which, by the way, is exactly what God intended. But, well, you know us. Being scattered doesn't satisfy the human heart for long, does it? Deep down, there's this intense impulse, not just to survive, but to gather, to concentrate our strength, and to figure out who we are by building something massive. Let's move to and see how this builds. Notice the progression here. At first, you've got a really simple, familial existence. Your whole identity is relational. Then, give it a few generations, and you see tribal dispersion, a much more communal vibe. But then, bam, Century 5 hits, and we see a massive, totally unprecedented pivot. We get the organized empire, a systemic existence. This is the exact moment in history where human power stops being spread out and diffused, it gets gathered up, intensely directed, and amplified. And the guy who kicks off this monumental shift? A man named Nimrod.
The text introduces him super abruptly, but with this incredibly heavy weight. He's just called a mighty one on the earth. Now, Nimrod isn't just some physically intimidating guy. He is a disruptive structural pivot point. Think about that. This is the literal first time in the entire biblical narrative that a human being is presented as a figure of structural power and dominance. He's not just a guy in a crowd. He becomes the gravitational center that humanity organizes around. He's the first kingly archetype, showing up before kingship was even a formal concept.
And then we get this famous, really layered phrase describing him: a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, on the surface, being a mighty hunter sounds pretty great, right? Very heroic. But in this specific early civilization context, hunting carries a much darker symbolic weight. It's a metaphor. It's about mastering, subduing, and asserting total superiority over life itself. And don't miss that little phrase, before the Lord. That doesn't mean intimacy. It means exposure. He is operating out in the open, fully visible to heaven, but acting completely independently of God. He's living his life as if God is watching, but he simply doesn't care.
Okay, let's dive into this contrast, because it is absolutely staggering. Look at the left side. You've got earlier guys like Abel, the shepherd, or Noah, the builder. Their entire lives were defined by preservation, walking with God, and just peaceful submission. But then look at the right side. Nimrod is the hunter. His entire internal drive is locked onto domination and superiority. With him, human development takes a sharp left turn, away from preserving life and aggressively toward controlling it.
Section 1. The Architecture of Ambition, Building Babel. Because here's the thing, that intense internal drive for domination, it doesn't stay locked inside his head for long. It scales up in a massive way. We're moving from Nimrod's personal psychology to its giant external manifestation. Genesis actually tells us that the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. So for the very first time, people aren't just living on the earth, they're restructuring it. This is humanity's first organized dominion over a territory.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how identity shifts when an empire is born. It's honestly kind of terrifying. In Nimrod's world, identity goes from being relational to being systemic. Think about it. In a family or a tribe, you're a son, a sister, a neighbor. You matter because of your relationships. But in an empire, you just become a participant, a tiny cog in this massive collective machine that is so much bigger than you, and suddenly, that system is what gives you your meaning. That was Nimrod's genius. And, for sure, it was his absolute danger.
So what's the psychology behind this? To build an empire, you have to unify everyone under one single vision. You centralize power, build structures meant to last forever, define everyone's identity by what they achieve, and just flat out refuse to remain scattered. Nimrod isn't creating chaos here, folks. He is highly ordered. And that is exactly why he's such a big deal. I mean, chaotic destruction is super easy to spot and condemn, right? But this is highly ordered pride. And ordered pride is what actually builds civilizations. The only problem is, the center of all that impressive coordination isn't God, it's humanity.
To pull this off, they make a massive technological leap. Step 1. They ditch natural stone and start manufacturing bricks. Step 2, they use bitumen for mortar. By the way, a really fun historical fact, bitumen is basically ancient asphalt, and it was such a ridiculously good waterproof binding agent that some of those ancient Mesopotamian foundations are actually still intact today, literally thousands of years later. But here's the kicker. Step 3, they take all this amazing innovation and direct it entirely toward upward self-exaltation. It just goes to show you, innovation is never completely neutral. Technology just amplifies whatever we already want to do. And at Babel, the whole civilization decided they were going to ascend to heaven, entirely on their own terms.
Section 2. The name and the scattering. A clash of identities. This really brings us to the core thesis of our explainer today. What was the ultimate endgame of Nimrod's super-centralized society? Why use all this cutting-edge tech to build a giant tower? Let me tell you, it was not just a fun architectural project. It was a massive spiritual declaration.
Let us make a name for ourselves. Wow, just let that monumental phrase sink in for a second. This wasn't just one guy rebelling like Cain did. No, this was an entire civilization moving in lockstep in one unified direction, up. The Tower of Babel was never about trying to reach God in humility. It was about reaching heaven without surrendering to the God of heaven. Earlier in Genesis, we saw humanity fall through disobedience, right? But here, humanity is trying to rise through pure self-assertion. It is literally the ultimate act of collective self-exaltation.
So the crucial point is this contrast right here. On the left, you have a received identity. Earlier in the text, people like Seth's descendants are called those who call upon the name of the Lord. They receive their name. They are entirely defined by their relational dependence on their Creator. But over on the right, Nimrod's world gives us the constructed legacy. Let us make a name for ourselves. It's self-originating. It's fiercely, aggressively independent. It's built 100% on human achievement. You're either receiving an identity through divine relationship, or you are exhausting yourself constructing a legacy by sheer human will.
So what does God do about this massive DIY legacy? Look at the text. His response is limitation, not destruction. He doesn't send another flood to wipe out Nimrod's empire. He just interrupts it. He confuses their languages, shatters that unhealthy unity, and scatters everybody. We usually read the story of Babel as this harsh, punitive act of wrath, but honestly, it's an incredible act of divine mercy. It's a built-in limitation to stop unified human pride from exponentiating into total, irredeemable corruption. God basically slows down the snowball of human pride by breaking their misaligned unity. He steps in to prevent humanity from becoming way too successful in the exact wrong direction.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 3, the internal empire, Nimrod today. Because let's be real, Nimrod is not just some historical archetype buried under thousands of years of Mesopotamian sand. He represents a psychological pattern that is very much alive and kicking inside all of us right now.
We call this the Proto-Babylon. And I don't mean Babylon as a dusty empire on a map. I mean a recurring spiritual and psychological pattern. It's the pattern of centralized power, human self-exaltation, and trying to build an identity completely without God. And this pattern, it just keeps repeating. You see it in the control of ancient Egypt and the dominance of the Roman Empire, and frankly, you see it in every system, or even in our own personal lives, whenever we try to define our reality apart from God. Nimrod lives on anytime a person decides to build their security and meaning without referencing the divine.
And this brilliantly illustrates the true danger of ordered pride. The internal empire completely takes over when success replaces surrender, when structure replaces spirit, when achievement replaces relationship. Cain showed us how dangerous a wounded ego can be. Noah showed us that an external cleansing doesn't fix the human heart. But Nimrod is a much more subtle, sophisticated warning. He shows us that humanity can be highly unified, insanely creative, and deeply, undeniably impressive, and still be moving entirely in the wrong direction. The systematization of our independence from God is a quiet, beautiful trap.
So I want to leave you with this quiet, introspective question today. Are you building your own empire, or are you receiving your identity? Are you out there trying to ascend on your own terms, systematically constructing your own legacy and desperately trying to make a name for yourself? Or are you willing to receive your identity through a dependent relationship? Because ultimately, it's a choice between the totally exhausting architecture of human pride and the profound peace of surrender. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.